in life in the rains that fall across this land and fill its veins, coursing through burns and rivers, from a trickle to a torrent. I am a primal force as old as time.
Right, I don't know if you noticed a bit about that, because more rain, more water to make our whiskey. Now this water will collect in rivers in different ways. Firstly, it will use it as an ingredient. It will also use it to cool and clean their distillery equipment. And then, importantly, we'll be using it to grow our third ingredient, which is barley. So out in these barley fields every summer, each ear of barley will turn from a fresh green to a beautiful golden colour before it is ready to be harvested. Now it's rarely as easily as that, but once we...
The barley is fooled into growing by steeping it in water. Then spreading it out on the malting house floor to germinate. As it germinates, the barley generates heat. It must be turned frequently to ensure that germination is even. To stop it growing, the barley is dried with warm air in the malt kiln. Or over a peat fire if a smoky flavour is desired. By now, the germination process has unlocked the starch, which is required for the next stage. At the mill, the malted barley is ground into a coarse flour called grist. It's a very noisy process. When the grist is mixed with hot water, the starch turns into a sugary liquid called wort. This process happens in the mash tun. After mashing, the wort is cooled. Only now can another special ingredient be added: yeast. A violent reaction begins. The washback becomes a trembling, bubbling cob. The yeast dies off, but its work is done. A strong, beer-like liquid called wash is the result. The wash is now a step closer to becoming a single malt whiskey. Now the distillation process can begin. The liquid is heated in a pot still, and because alcohol boils at a lower temperature, it separates from the water. This alcoholic vapour rises up the neck, and as it cools, it condenses back into liquid. But it needs to be distilled again to further increase its alcohol content, and that takes place here in the spirit still. Each distillery has its own unique shape of copper pot still, another factor that ensures each whiskey will have its own unique flavour. This time, the spirit is transformed. It is now around 70% alcohol and is known as new spirit.
Right, so that is how we get our new spirit. And once we have it, we'll pop it into one of these. These are known as a spirit safe. As you can see, it's got 3 sections to it, because we split that new spirit into 3 parts, known as the heads, the hearts, and the tails. Now the heads is a little bit too strong in alcohol content, the tails is a little bit too weak, and so we would take those and we will pump them back into our spirit still, where they will be redistilled. However, that heart is absolutely perfect to move on to our final stage of whiskey production, and so it will be pumped into an oak cask just like this one, where it will mature. Now maturation is a very important step in alcohol. This clear, colourless liquid that's known as new spirit, and it really does look just like water. There are 2 main types of casks that we age in. We have a bourbon cask and we have a sherry cask. Now, as you age it, it gets a lot darker. So it goes from this colourless liquid to a more gold amber colour. If you age it in a bourbon cask, it'll actually get a bit of a lighter colour, more of like a yellow golden colour, like here. And if you age it in a sherry cask, you're more likely to get an orange ambery sort of colour, which will look something like this. So just by looking at the colour of your whiskey, you can know if you're expecting more of a bourbon cask influence to your taste of your whiskey, or more of a sherry cask influence. Right, these are the tools that Cooper will use to make a barrel, even to these days. As you can see, they are very traditional tools. Also here we have a visualization of that angel share. So about 2% a year, and so if you age it 6 years, you'll lose 6%, and if you age it for 25 years, you'll end up losing about 40% of that barrel. And then over here, of course, we have an old oak. This is American oak bourbon cask. And if you run your finger along the inside, you can actually see some of that charring soot that would have been from the charring process.
And yeast. However, if you want to make a Scotch whiskey, you need that secret fourth ingredient, which of course is the country of bonnie Scotland itself. Now there are actually 5 different whiskey producing regions of Scotland. Each will have their own geographies, their own weather systems, their own water sources, and even their own traditions when it comes to making whiskey. And this produces 5 distinct flavour profiles between those regions. Now these regions are the Lowlands, the Highlands, Speyside, Campbellton, and Islay. On your way in, I handed you one of these cards. These are scratch and sniff cards. So I will talk about each region. I will then go on to talk about their flavour profiles. When I do so, I'll indicate to you a section on the card. Give that section a scratch and then a sniff, and you will get an exaggerated aroma of some of the flavours you are expecting of a whiskey from that region. Right, let's start off with our first region, which is the Lowlands. It is our southernmost region here in Scotland, and it hosts our 2 biggest cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh. Now, the Lowlands, as the name suggests, has a lot of low land, with a lot of low rolling hills and lots of nutrient-rich soil, which is excellent for growing our whiskey's barley. You'll also find a lot of golf courses here in the Lowlands. Of the Gulf Coast, you'll find out east of Edinburgh. Also, as I said, it hosts the 2 biggest cities. This here is Glasgow, a vibrant metropolis with a strong industrial heritage. And then, of course, we have Edinburgh as well. That's Edinburgh Castle, and if you follow the Royal Mile all the way down, you'll end up in Holyrood Park. Edinburgh is also home to the largest international arts festival in the world, the Edinburgh Fringe, as well as the Edinburgh Military Tattoo. You may also recognize these chaps. These are the 3 bridges. 3 fourth bridges. These 3 different bridges built in 3 different centuries. That's the oldest and most famous, the 4th Railway Bridge. Now with a lowland whiskey, you are expecting some maltiness to come through. So some oat biscuits, some cereal grains, toast, malted barley, and then some citrus as well. So if you find that yellow section on the bottom right-hand side of your card, if you give that a scratch and then a sniff, you might be able to smell some grapefruit. Right, our second region is also our largest, and it is the mighty Highlands. The main city of the Highlands is Inverness, which you see here. Inverness sits on the banks of the famous Loch Ness, where of course you will find the elusive but very real Loch Ness monster. But she only shows her head after you've had a few drams of whiskey. Funny how that works. Now, the Highlands are also aptly named because you have a lot of high land, a lot of hills, a lot of valleys, and a lot of deep freshwater lochs. There's some absolutely stunning natural geography here in the Highlands, this being the Isle of Skye, as well as some notable man-made landmarks, such as the Glenfinnan Viaduct from Harry Potter. Or if James Bond or Outland is more your scene, you might recognise the Ailingdonan Castle. The Highlands are kept warm and cosy at night under a thick blanket of heather. And if you're very lucky, you might get to meet some of the Highlands' hairy locals. Now, with a Highland whiskey, you're expecting some floralness to come through with your whiskey, as well as some honey and some nuts. So if you find that purple section on the top left-hand side of your card, you might be able to smell some heather. Now our third region is the mighty Speyside. This small blue triangle that lies between Inverness and Aberdeen houses over a third of our single malt distilleries here in Scotland. It's named after the River Spey, which you see on the left-hand side there, and it is our fastest flowing river in Scotland. It's fed from ice melt and mountain springs and then filters through layers of ancient granite, meaning it's some of the purest and softest river water you will find in Scotland. Now, Speyside, you'll actually find a lot of thick green forest, which actually came in very handy when making whiskey was less than legal for hiding your distilleries from those snooping taxmen. Now, if you want to find a Speyside distillery these days, all you need to do is look upwards for these Japanese-inspired pagoda rooftops. Also, if you want to know how important our whiskey is to us here in Scotland, you can have a gander at the Speyside cooperage. This is our largest cooperage in Scotland, and there are actually about 22 million barrels of whiskey currently aging in Scotland. Now, with a Speyside whiskey, you're expecting a fruitier palate. So orchard fruits, tropicals, or dried fruits. So if you find that blue section on the top right-hand side of your glass, give that a sniff. And you get some pear. Drooping Kintyre Peninsula there, and it is a very remote location. Even though it only sits about 100 miles as the crow flies from Edinburgh, if you want to drive there, you'll end up driving about 200 miles down some long, twisting, and frankly, quite terrifying Scottish roads. Now, it really is a bit of a time capsule of historic Scotland, with a lot of the traditions and heritage kept alive on the Kintyre Peninsula. Now, the town of Capleton, which you see here, was once known as the whiskey capital of the world. Because in this small bay area here, you had over 30 distilleries. But unfortunately, due to some events like the American alcohol prohibition and the Great Depression, a lot of those distilleries shut down and then never reopened. So that number has dwindled down to a more modest 3 distilleries. But those 3 distilleries still capture that maritime heritage that you will expect from a Capleton whiskey. Now, that maritime heritage, you are expecting some sea salt from that sea air to come through, as well as some vanilla and some toffee. So if you find that green section on the bottom left-hand side of your card, give that a scratch, give it a sniff. You might be able to smell some vanilla. Now, lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have the island of Islay. It sits on the west coast of Scotland here, exposing it to the brutal might of the Atlantic Ocean. It passes Islay's coastlines, leaving these rugged but absolutely gorgeous rock formations here. Now, an Islay whiskey is notorious in the whiskey drinking community for being smoky. It gets this smokiness from peat. Who's peat? Peat's not a person, you find it in the ground. It is an early form of coal, and we dig it up from trenches just like this one before drying it out and then burning it underneath our barley as it's drying. And that is what gives an Islay whiskey that distinctive smoky flavour. Islay itself is absolutely gorgeous, with some fantastic wide open beaches, some epic wildlife, and because there's no landmass between Islay and Canada, if you look out westwards, you'll see some of the most gorgeous sunsets you'll see anywhere in the world. Now, with an Islay whiskey, you're expecting that smokiness to come through. And so this could be as cigar smoke, as wood smoke, or sometimes even a medicinal iodine smell. So if you find that red section on the left-hand side of your card, give that a scratch and give it a sniff. You might be able to smell that wood smoke. Now, those are the 5 different whiskeys of Scotland, as well as 5 different flavour characteristics you're expecting to find of a whiskey from that region. So far, I've only talked about one type of whiskey, and that is single malt whiskey. Single meaning everything in that bottle comes from, it is made with 100% malted barley. It actually accounts for 90% of our production. That's known as blended whiskey. And now we're going to head next door shortly, but I've thrown a lot of information at you. So if you have any questions for me at this time, feel free to ask me about the tour or just whiskey in general. Any questions at all? Annual sales. And the main part of our blend is our grain whiskey. Now, grain whiskey was invented roughly in the 1830s by this Irishman here, Aeneas Coffey. He patented the continuous still,
Now with a continuous still, we can use more than just barley to make our whiskey, but also things like wheat, maize, and rye. Now a grain whiskey will tend to be a little bit softer and less intense in its flavours, but when we mix in some of those more flavoursome single malt whiskies, we end up with something that's known as blended whiskey. Now you guys are sitting in a recreation of an 1870s era blender sample room. This is the type of room where master blenders would have come together, put their noses and their palates to the test to try and create some delicious blends of whiskey. Now about 200 years ago, unfortunately the most popular whiskey in the world was Irish whiskey. The Irish triple distilled our whiskey, meaning it's a lot softer and easier to drink than our fiery double distilled Scotch whiskey. Now, when we started this process of making our grain whiskey and then mixing in those single malts in a blend, it made it cheaper, more palatable, and more consistent, which put us right back on top, where of course we belong. Now, the first Scotch blend available in the market was known as Usher's Green Stripe. It was made right here in Edinburgh in the 1860s. Now, this trend of making blended whiskey really caught on. And licensed grocers who used to make tea blends started using those skills to blend something maybe a little bit stronger. Now this really put Scotland on the map, and we started shipping those blends out all over the world. Now if you're still exclusively a single malt drinker, that is absolutely fine by me, but you still have a lot to thank these master blenders for. They demanded consistency from these notoriously inconsistent single malt distilleries, and so they started enforcing practices which mean that a bottle that you will buy today should taste exactly the same as a bottle that you would have bought 3 or 4 years ago. Now, I would like to turn your attention to these bottles that you will find underneath this table here, and I will show you how we go about mixing our blended whiskey. We start off with about 60 to 70% of that grain whiskey as our base. We will then add some single malts for that extra flavour. If you'd like something a bit malty or a bit fruity, you can add a Lowland or a Speyside whiskey. If you'd like something maybe a little bit more robust, you can add a Highland or a Campbellton whiskey. You can also use an Islay whiskey in your blend, but you do have to do so carefully and sparingly. That smoky flavour is quite intense, and it can end up overpowering all the other flavours that you've put in that blend. And the key to making a good blend is making sure that you have a nice balanced flavour profile, and all those flavours work together in perfect harmony. Now, to teach you a little bit more about our blending process, I would like to introduce our oldest colleague here, Douglas.
Yeah, that's better. Allow me to formally introduce myself. Douglas McIntyre.
Number 3. If you would like that salty, it's one of the largest collections of unopened Scotch whisky you'll find anywhere in the world. Now, its official name is the Diageo Clyde de Diez Whiskey. Right guys, so if you would like to follow me into the back of the room, make sure you've got all your
हामीहरू चाहिँ यो whiskey making टुरमा छौँ.
I hope they give it to us in like a box and they clean them out and put them in a bag for slow. Sure, is that called it?
If you guys would just like to gather around this table.
ल स्कच whiskey उता समुद्रमा आइपुग्यौँ हामी. ल Oh my god. त्यताहरू कहाँ देखिन्छ अरे, यहाँ आउनु पर्यो नि हेर्नु.
Tasting our whiskies. Now, probably the most frequent question we get asked here at the Scotch Whisky Experience: what's the best way to drink whiskey? Do you have it neat? Do you have it with ice? Do you have it with water? The answer is very simple.